Hey everybody, hope you're staying safe and healthy. I want to give you a little introduction to the boom method, the book that I put out last year, and I figure let's just dive right in. So I put together the boom method as a way of documenting an approach to practicing that I developed based on the way that my career has developed. Uh, as a studio player and as an improviser, 90% of what I play on the job, I don't know what it's going to be until I get there. So I had to develop a practice routine that was geared towards being prepared to do whatever I could do spontaneously, either in studio playing by sight reading or in improvising by playing what comes to mind. So all of the exercises in this book are geared towards being responsive and nimble and flexible, so that you can actually execute whatever is either in front of you or in your mind. So the warm-up, the activation series in this book, is really, really simple, but geared towards being very responsive and efficient with your airstream and allowing the chops to follow suit. So basically, the idea here is that we're using breath attacks to get the activation of the air happening, so that we're getting a fast release of air out of the lungs via the abdominal support system, and we're stabilizing our corners but allowing the center of our chops to be nice and open and responsive. So in conjunction with breath attacks, we put in these bends, which I don't really like to call them lip bends because I think they're more driven by the airstream. But it's basically an over-under kind of sine wave around the main initial pitch, which is C in the middle of the treble staff, and then followed by a descending major arpeggio, ending on a resonant low note. So let me just demonstrate the basic exercise super quick. In keeping with the spirit of this thing, these are my first notes of the day, so, be kind. So the idea there is that we're creating the initial impulse with the airstream. The breath attacks are meant to be rhythmic. They're meant to be, sort of like a quick release of air. So it's more of a rather than a kind of a breath attack. Basically, it's the same way that you would articulate, an accented note, but with no tongue. And then the over under bend thing that I mentioned is basically where we do a half step bend with the air to start, and then I follow that with a valve, which is a technique that Malcolm McNabb showed me years ago when I was taking lessons with him. Just alternating a bend with a half step valve, so that you're relating the bend to the way that it feels to play a half step, and then follow the half step with an upper bend, which is basically just fingering a half step above the note that you're playing, but keeping the note the same. So the idea there is that you're taking the scoop of the bend out and just going directly from one center of a pitch to the center of the bend back to the center of the pitch. So if you were to actually play the upper bend, it would be, but instead of going up the half step, we're just skipping that step and going straight to the center of that bend. So hopefully that makes sense. And then we're following that trajectory of the airstream that's been set up by the breath attacks and the bends, and we're carrying that through the downward arpeggio and ending on a resonant low note, so that we're really focused on relaxation and uninhibited airflow, and getting to a point where the tone in the lower register is big and open and operatic and resonant. So. Now, of course, you can do this with any arpeggio. Lately, I've been using augmented arpeggios because all of the intervals are symmetrical, but you could do the same thing with minor arpeggios or diminished, or whatever you really want to focus on. But I like the idea of relating this to a melodic sensibility. So major arpeggio is a really easy way to start, because we all know how it sounds. It's very comfortable and sort of like a home base for a lot of us. And it's easy to imagine that being the end of a melodic phrase, for instance. So as we add partials on the upper register, the idea is to keep that same form as consistent as possible. So let's say we go up to the E. So we're now starting on the third of a major arpeggio. So here, I don't know if you noticed, but I'm really kind of trying to almost ricochet the air off the corners of the pipes in the horn, so that it's really hitting all the way down the lead pipe when I do the breath attack. So I'm not thinking about what's happening inside the mouthpiece. I'm thinking about what's happening coming out the bell. So, one thing I tell my students is that the sound has to travel a minimum of 8 feet through the instrument to reach the audience. Because if you were to unravel the trumpet, it's about 8 feet. But in order to do that, you kind of have to think of the release of the air like a dart, or like a flick of the wrist kind of frisbee thing. So that that idea of almost like bouncing it off this first corner and then bouncing it off of here and sending it through the rest of the horn with speed and momentum helps me kind of visualize the way that I want to release my air. So again, it's not like, you hear the difference there. It's that rhythmic impulse versus a gradual entry. So I almost feel like a kind of flick of the wrist with the airstream, and that's really why I call this section the activation, because you're activating the whole support network of your breathing apparatus. So then we add another one on top. Always focusing that the trajectory of your phrase is leading to the low note. So the upper notes, it's important to get the activation happening, but for me, that's not the goal of the exercise. I mean, overall, as you go through the series, the goal is to bring all of these elements together. But always thinking about that long arc towards the low note, because really what we're trying to do here is extend that feeling of relaxation and control through all of the register of the instrument. So then, depending on how I'm feeling in a day, I may go up to the high C, or I may continue to the next one. Really, you should only go as high as you feel comfortable doing, because you never want to practice straining. And some days it takes me a whole series to get up into the upper register, and some days it's there right away. I'm not really sure what today is, but let's see. So today feels like I need a little bit more time to get that open and free, but it's not totally unresponsive either. So as I go through this, descending through all of the various keys, As the upper register gets more responsive and open and free, I start adding partials on the top and go basically as high as I can. So through the course of the whole uh, descending pattern of 12 keys, I am ultimately trying to extend equally in both directions through the range of the instrument. So that's essentially how I approach this first series of the boom method, and I go through all 12 keys every day, and I find that what that really sets me up to do is articulate cleanly, play with a nice fluid airstream, play with a responsive and flexible embouchure, and that sets me up to be able to do whatever it is that I have to do in a day. So I hope you find this useful. Please come back. I'll be posting these videos on my Instagram, which is Dan Rosenboom. I think there's an underscore at Dan Rosenboom. And you can follow me on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, or go to my website, danrosenboom.com. And again, I hope you find this useful, and if you dig it, please send me any questions you've got, and please support Balquitter Music, the publisher, by buying the book. So thank you so much, and stay safe and healthy.